So it's the international break, which means that the next time that there is going to be a playoff game in MLS is going to be November 25th. And I think I already told you guys back in the review of how I will probably maybe discuss later whether or not if it's a great idea for MLS to have the playoffs during a period where they have to have an international break and they have to have like a 2-week kind of period. And in some way, I don't know if they can really avoid that because we usually always have international break between October and November and also September. But because we have a long period without a MLS action, this is the perfect time for me to do the Moving Forward series. And yes, I am still doing the Moving Forward series. I did not quit doing it after I finished doing the last team that got eliminated from the playoffs. This goes into the playoffs too. And it's for the teams that have been eliminated from the playoffs. And ultimately, I will also do a Moving Forward series for the winning team of this year MLS and the one that will be crowned MLS champions this year. So we'll start with the Union because they were the first one to be eliminated in the playoffs. And the Union, of course, finished the season with a record of 15 wins, 5 draws, and 14 losses. They have 50 points this season. They finished the season in 6th place, so they just about get over the line and made it to the playoffs, although they were clinched in the playoffs a long time ago, and they kind of struggle a little bit as they were heading into the playoffs and even lost a couple of games as they were heading into the knockout round. Their goals score tally this season is 49 goals, and their goal that they have allowed tally this season is 50, and their goal differential is -1, which is pretty normal for a team that is just above the red line. You know, they have around the average number of goals that they have scored, the average number of goals conceded this season, and their goal differential is right around the 0 kind of mark. And they got eliminated in the knockout round by NYCFC, and they got eliminated by the same score that they lost to NYCFC the previous couple of days on decision day. Both of those games ended 3-1, and that's how the Union got eliminated from the playoffs by that score against NYCFC. The top goal scored for the Union, Fafa Pico with 10 goals this season, which what's surprising about that is that he did not score a goal until June. So for the final 4 months of the season, he scored 10 goals. I mean, that is pretty impressive from Fafa Pico. And then, of course, Corey Burke with 10 goals. Corey Burke, another guy that hasn't scored a lot of goal in the first half of the season. He starts scoring goal in the second half of the season. And this Union team really picked themselves up in the second half of the season. I'll talk more about it when we get into the right side of the board. Ezenio with 6 goals this season, Borek Deutschkel with 5, and CJ Sapon with only 4 goals this season. So after last year, he had a career year of 16 goals. He only scored 4 this season, and I think that's the lowest he has scored in 4 years, pretty much. It looks like that year where he scored 16 goals were kind of a one-off kind of year, just kind of an outlier kind of year that CJ Sapon has, because CJ Sapon is an okay MLS striker, but he's not like a double-digit kind of every single year kind of that striker. He's kind of like a mediocre kind of striker, and this year he pretty much went back to his mediocre form, and I think maybe even at best a mediocre form, because he was horrible this season. Top assist leader, Borek Deutschkel with 18 assists, which actually ties Lucho Acosta with the most assists this year of any MLS players. Harris Medunian with 7 assists, Alejandro Bedoya with 6, Fafa Pico with 5, and CJ Sapon with 3 assists. Now, what went right for the Union? And this is where I'm gonna change the format a little bit. So instead of me saying what went wrong and what went right, I'm gonna go with what went right and what still needs to improve as the format for all those teams that got eliminated from the from the, well, not the playoffs. They were in the playoffs, but they got eliminated in either the knockout round or the semifinal or even the conference final. So what went right for the Union to get themselves into the playoffs? Well, the emergence of young and unknown star player. And what that means is you got a bunch of these young kind of talented guys mixed with a couple of kind of unproven player guys that either comes from USL or just guys that just comes for this team through transfer. So guys like McKenzie, Austin Trusty, Fafa Pico, Corey Burke, Deutschkow, and all those guys, and even Medunian. All those guys were young and unknown kind of star. Like, nobody thought that when you look at the way this team was set up, you wouldn't think that they would actually do very, very well. But instead, they did exactly what the opposite of everyone was thinking, and that is they were amazing. I mean, they were a very entertaining team to watch. And also, that brings me to the second point, which is Jim Curtin, who has turned a team of misfits into one of the most entertaining teams to watch. And say what you say about Jim Curtin, and I know a lot of Union fans still wants him to out, and I've been saying how I just don't understand why do Union fans and people want him to leave and get fired from this team. He basically took a team that earlier in the season was just dead and buried, and a team that looked like they were going to be heading into a long year, and he basically decided to take some risks and bring these unproven and young kind of players, and look what happened. It worked out perfectly. And I know some people will say, well, he got lucky. The fact that some of the guys that he brought in actually kind of show up. Well, isn't that how coaches, when they choose these young and unproven players, isn't that how it kind of works, and how in some way it's kind of luck, but it's also the fact that the belief that Jim Curtin has with these players is just something we have never seen with other coaches before. And other coaches would probably not try this kind of method because it takes a lot of risk. And I think at that point Jim Curtin, he kind of was forced to take that risk, because if he didn't take that risk, if he was trying to still do the same approach, this team would not be in the playoffs. I guarantee you that. And he would have been long gone before this season comes. And there's even still question whether or not he might be leaving or not, and whether he is going to get fired in the offseason, which I'll of course talk about that in the moving forward part of this video. And then of course the third thing that went right for them is that they reached the playoffs and the US Open Cup final. And yes, I get that when they went to the playoffs, like all other years the Union goes to the playoff, it's one and done. And in the US Open Cup, for the third times that they have reached that competition, the third time they reached the final, they were humble again and lost in the final. I get the frustration on that part, but when you look at this team, and at the beginning of the year, if I would have told you, if you would have told me that this team, by the end of the year, will be in the playoffs and they would make an appearance in the US Open Cup final, I would have just laughed at you. I would think you're crazy in many ways. But that's what they did this year, and that is something that certainly is one of the most surprising thing that they have done this season. Like, there is no way, when I look at this squad in the beginning of the season, I thought that this team would be in the playoffs. I mean, it was definitely better than the team last season, but I still think that they still are kind of like in a working progress. And in many ways, this year they kind of overachieved a little bit and just took one step ahead of that regression and that rebuild that they're doing right now. But in terms of what still needs to improve for this team, well, they still need to get over the hump, which means that they still need to, like, all this thing is good, but I know a lot of Union fans will always remind me, and certainly all the other fans that are praising what the Union has done, is that this team still haven't won a playoff series. And this team have been in the finals 3 times, and they all lost those 3 finals. So this team still haven't really kind of gone over the hump, and just somehow, with all the adversity and all the pressure on them, they still haven't really just push forward and move into the next step. And as long as that is going to continue, it doesn't matter how good they are and how entertaining this team is, and just it's going to be a very frustrating things if they eventually won't do that. And I'm assuming they'll probably will do that in these next couple of years. I mean, if they can get what this team is doing this year, and if they can even maybe improve a little bit of that next season, then I think maybe this team is destined to make the playoffs again and actually win a playoff series. And the other thing that still need to improve is that they kind of need a little bit improving in terms of their signing, and that some of their signings they did this season were a little bit hit and miss. So, for example, they got Deutsch Kell in the middle of the season, and what do you know? Deutsch Kell turns out to be an absolute amazing stud. And actually, they got them in the beginning of the season, not in the middle part of the season. And he turns out to be the joint top assist leader in MLS, which was a huge hit. But unfortunately, if you remember all the way back in the beginning of the year, and what I was talking about this Union team, is that I always talk about how whether or not, if this Union team is gonna maybe creep into that playoff conversation, they need to get David Accam to be the guy that will push them into that playoff conversation. And it turns out throughout this season, David Accam was almost not even a factor whatsoever. I mean, that was a lot of waste of money getting David Accam. I mean, what, 1.4 million that they got from the Chicago Fire, and he only scored one goal, and the one goal he scored, ironically, was against his old team. And yeah, that was a huge miss for the Union, and that was certainly a huge waste of money, and that might come back to haunt them in terms of guys that they might get in the future, because they spent so much money on that, and they're now sitting with so much debt money in terms of that contract that David Accam is having, and that for majority of the season he's either be on the bench or he's just come in as a sub, since he's now kind of out of favor. So yeah, that was a huge miss kind of signing from the Union, and I'm hoping the Union would, in the future, in terms of their signings, if they want to improve, they need to have more of the Deutsch Kell kind of signings. And then the other thing that they need to improve, and I think this is only put in terms of what happened earlier in the season, is the finishing. I mean, the early part of the season, you've been kind of hearing me slating on the Union's finishing that was just absolutely horrendous. Like, I think they probably had one of the highest goal expectancy out of every single team in MLS, because they always create those chances, and if they only put away those chances, they might be even better than what they were this season. I mean, I know eventually they kind of figure it out, and eventually they finally figure out to put away chances that they wasted so much in the beginning of the season. But in the beginning of the season, I mean, as much as they just pepper the goal and create so many chances to the opponent's half, they just couldn't put the ball into the back of the net. And that is one of the big reasons why they were, at time in the beginning of the season, endure a bit of a goal drought, and the fact that just nobody can finish on this team. And at that point, I thought it was really going to derail their season, like with no confidence whatsoever in terms of finishing, and they're in a bad kind of run. I thought the Union season was kind of done at that point. But moving forward for the Union, obviously going back to the Jim Curtin situation, his future is certainly up for debate in this offseason, and I originally kind of want him to be back for this team. I know a lot of Union fans do not want to see him back this season, and he's actually out of contract this year. That is actually one thing I didn't know, but I kind of feel like he deserved another chance. I mean, with what he has done, building a squad from a bunch of players that were just not working in a system, and then just put in a bunch of young guys and believing that they can somehow get resort. I think you got to give Jim Curtin another shot at this. And if next season, if Jim Curtin kind of underachieve in terms of what he done this season and the fact that they just could not get over the hump and finally win a playoff series, then yeah, I get that probably they should let go of Jim Curtin. But one thing that is interesting about Jim Curtin in terms of his future, and maybe this might play a big part of it, is that the Union has a new GM now. Our Ernie Stewart is no longer the GM of the Union. He's now the GM for the U.S. men's national team, and they brought in Ernest Tanner as their new GM. And Jim Curtin has always been an Ernie Stewart guy. Now, about Ernest Tanner, I'm not quite sure if he thinks that Jim Curtin is his guy. And usually when we see a new GM just come in and a GM change during the mid-season, usually that could play a big part in terms of the manager that is in charge of this, or the head coach that is in charge of this team, because the previous GM might be a favorite of this manager or this head coach, but once the new GM comes and if he doesn't like the head coach the previous GM puts him, then they could of course fire him or sack him or get another guy in replacement. So it's going to be interesting to see what Ernest Tanner will do with Jim Curtin and whether or not does he trust him as much as Ernie Stewart trust him when he was still in charge. And yeah, we'll see how this is going to go. And if they do fire Jim Curtin, then who exactly the Union will get? I mean, you know, I know MDS has already been ticking, and I know Almeida is already been ticking, and I know probably Chiletto is going to potentially be taken by Atlanta United. So the only choice that I think they might have left in terms of the head coaching role might be Caleb Porter. I mean, Caleb Porter going to the Union, I don't know. I don't think that might not be a great idea. I mean, right now I haven't heard anything about the Union potentially getting rid of Jim Curtin in the offseason and not renewing his contract. But if they do not offer him a new contract, who exactly are going to be their new head coach heading into next season? And then of course, I kind of talk about the second thing of how Ernie Sanders is going to improve this team, and you know whether or not if he's gonna let go Jim Curtin and not renew his contract, or let him stay and give him another chance to try to move this team forward. And then the third thing is that can this young and overachieving kind of player squad that the Union has had, can they do it again next season? Can they improve? You know, is this kind of a one-off kind of thing that they had, or are they going to continue to excel and fulfill the promise that a lot of Union fans really hope with what the squad that they have? Because this squad is a very promising squad, and it is a very inexperienced and young kind of squad. And the only way that I think the Union is going to improve next season is that those same players that have a good season this year, they need to do it again in the second year. They can't be just inconsistent and just fall off the map next season if they're not going to improve. So it'll be interesting to see if that is going to happen next season. But yeah, that is pretty much it for my Moving Forward series. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and let me know if you're a Union fans, what do you think of this, and what do you think moving forward your future is going to be, and what kind of improvement or what do you like about this season? Let me know in the comments below. And yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash that subscribe button, and yeah, I of course will see you guys next time. And tomorrow I will be doing Dallas for the Moving Forward series.